But our special focus is on the economic survey ahead of Narendra Modi 2.0's first budget to be delivered by Nirmala Sitharaman at 11 a.m. tomorrow. Let's tell you the highlights of the economic survey. What are the forecasts and prognosis for the economy? Growth is down. The survey admits to 6.8% in 2018-19 from 7.2%. So there is an admission of a slowdown in growth. The survey still tries to claim that India is the fastest growing major economy. The economy projected to grow, they say, at 7% in 2019-20. The fiscal deficit, again a problem, 3.4% of GDP. The current account deficit up from 1.9% to 2.6% in April to December 2018. This, they say, is on account of the higher oil prices, and the overall fiscal deficit projected to be at 5.8%. Inflation contained within 4.4%. Inflation remains one of the bright spots. Growth in investment up from 9.3% in 2017-18 to just 10%, so only a marginal increase. Industrial production growth, and this is again a problematic, down to 3.6% from 4.4%, an admission in the survey that in a sense there has been a plateauing of investments at the moment. Let's take a look at exactly what the survey says, the wide gap between hope and reality.
साथियों, न्यू इंडिया में हमारा ये सहयोग और व्यापक होने वाला है। हम आने वाले 5 वर्षों में भारत को $5 ट्रिलियन की इकोनॉमी बनाने के लक्ष्य के साथ आगे बढ़ रहे हैं।
The Prime Minister talking up India achieving a $5 trillion economy target by 2025. But the economic survey admits that the country is on the brink of a slowdown. General fiscal deficit at 5.8% and of the central government at 3.4% of the GDP is a cause for concern, with the economy pegged to grow at 7%. But to achieve a $5 trillion target, the economy needs to grow at 8% per annum at least.
The survey talks about the blueprint for achieving this vision, and the key theme here is shifting gears through a virtuous cycle. As I'll just quickly describe, we have been growing at a good rate, but we now need to be shifting gears to grow at 8% continuously in a sustained manner.
कि आप में से भी अनेक साथियों का
While admitting that investments have bottomed out, the survey also admits raising investment and boosting savings is now key to bringing about an economic revival.
Investment, as I just mentioned, is the key driver of that cycle. Savings that happen in the economy enable investment. Investment leads to improvements in productivity. And when firms become more productive, they're able to go and compete in the international markets, thereby foster exports, and which helps the economy. We are intending to shift gears by taking this economy into a virtuous cycle which is driven by investment.
The opposition has been quick to point out the gap between hope and reality.
प्रोजेक्टेड तो आप बहल कुछ भी रख लें, मगर कहाँ तक सफलता प्राप्त होती है। पहली बात तो ये कि आप सही मानों में ज़मीनी सच्चाई पर कहाँ तक पहुँचते हैं, कितने आप नौकरियाँ मुहैया कर सकते हो, कितना अनएम्प्लॉयमेंट कम कर सकते हो, कितना महंगाई कम कर सकते हो, ये तो ज़मीनी सच्चाई बताती है।
The other big focus of the survey is on reorienting policies for MSME growth. But unless there is major structural reform in key areas of land, capital and finance, that won't be easy. Interestingly, the survey promises that the finance minister will redesign the minimum wage system in India for inclusive growth.
Now, let's face it, the budget cannot fix jobs, but what it can do, surely, is bring about an economic revival and implement all that has been suggested in the National Economic Survey, which has been suggested by the CEA, to ensure that all those policies and all those suggestions really get into reality and translate into reality going forward as well. In the past, we've seen most of these have not translated into the actual budget. We're hoping this time around it is different. In New Delhi, Chaiti Narula for India Today.
So we're going to decode the economic survey and also look ahead to tomorrow's budget. I'm joined in the studios by fine economic minds, Professor Arun Kumar, the person who's written extensively on various issues in the last 5 years, especially demonetization, joined by Prasenjit Bose, formerly a member of the left, now in his avatar as an economist. Also joining me, Rajdeep Dubey, business editor at India Today, and Sanjeev Ahluwalia of the Observer Research Foundation. I'm also joined, though, by two newsmakers who I spoke to earlier. Sanjeev Sanyal, Principal Economic Advisor in the Narendra Modi government in the Finance Ministry, and by Kiran Majumdar-Shaw of Biocon. Appreciate both of you joining us. Let's come to the two of you first. As the Principal Economic Advisor, you tell us, when you did this survey, the big question that is being raised, is the survey overly ambitious? You all still seem to be sticking to this $5 trillion dream that the Prime Minister seems to have woven by 2024. How do you really achieve it? Is the survey being overly unrealistic when the reality, as the survey expresses, is that there is a serious problem on the ground of a slowdown?
Of course, it's what's the point of having a target if it's not ambitious? It's not a forecast, it's a target. And yes, it is ambitious. It aims to hit a $5 trillion economy by 2024-25, and that's equivalent to about 375 lakh crores in rupee terms. But the basic point here is that we think that we can do it, and it requires us to have a real GDP growth rate of 8% being sustained from here on.
You know, it requires an 8% GDP growth rate to reach $5 trillion. Your own economic survey is pegging it at 7%, which many people are saying in itself is again over ambitious for 2019-20. Given that, given the manner in which the numbers are stacking up and the fact that your survey is admitting that there is a slowdown in growth, again I come to it. You know, are you being overly ambitious? Are you being unrealistic? Are you pulling the wool over people's eyes?
Of course, you know, we are aware that the GDP has slowed down over the last couple of quarters, and so that is a forecast of what we expect to happen over the next year or so. So that is indeed the case, but the whole idea is that we do the reforms and the various things we have talked about in the survey, and I'll accelerate growth. You know,
so Kiran Majumdar-Shaw, do you believe that the economic survey says growth down now to 6.8% from 7.2%? Economy seems to be decelerating. Is this growth forecast of 7% realistic in your view? Or is the, as I said, you know, are we being, once again, numbers being fudged?
Okay. So I certainly believe that, delivering on a aspirational 7% GDP growth rate for the coming fiscal is an absolutely doable number. And I also believe that, like the Chief Economic Advisor said, I think we do need to create a virtuous cycle of investment, consumption and jobs. And I think this will basically move the needle in terms of growth. But having said that, we need to kickstart that virtuous cycle. And that virtuous cycle can only be kickstarted with investment. And this investment has to be dimensioned in various ways. One is investment in infrastructure, one is investment in education, healthcare, and some of the basic amenities that the social sector requires. And then we do need to incentivize and encourage job-linked investments, which means that apart from MSMEs, I think large-scale industry that is going to link and create jobs needs to be incentivized. I personally believe that the cost of capital is something that needs to be addressed if you want to see mega investment in every sector.
You know, as you said, private investment is the key. The CEA, also the Chief Economic Advisor in this blueprint for the survey, says investment is the key driver that catalyzes the economy to shift gears into this virtual cycle. Do you really, though, see private investment picking up? with capacity utilization just about 70% to 72%. Where is that? Where do you see this private investment really shifting gears?
Well, you know, you must understand that private investment will only happen if there is, a capacity crunch. And there doesn't seem to be a capacity crunch. In fact, there seems to be an oversupply, and there's a poor utilization of existing capacity. So you're not going to see private investment unless you increase consumption. Again, the way to increase consumption is to really focus on the GST, which has been levied on various items, which has made it very, which has challenged consumption in many ways. And I think the proposal to basically use a two-tiered system of 12 and 18% and a zero-rated GST for many other items is the right way forward. In fact, I personally would have preferred a flat 15% GST, but even the two-tiered system is a better option than the current multi-tiered GST system, especially at the high rates of 28%, which has killed consumption and demand.
You know, GST, of course, is a legacy of Modi government 1.0, which brings me in a sense to the entire question of reform. GST was an important indirect tax reform. Sanjeev Sanyal, you know, in this economic survey, the chief economic advisor speaks about the need for reforms. This investment cycle can be kick-started now by structural reforms. The general belief, as I said earlier, has been that the Modi government has fought shy in its first term of major structural reforms that were really needed to trigger growth, land, labor, capital. While the focus was using fiscal resources on large government schemes like Swachh Bharat, Ujjwala, all very worthy, when it came to structural reforms, the government got bogged down. Will that now change given the fact that there is a serious economic slowdown staring at us?
I think that the last 5 years were a certain set of reforms done with the following objectives. One, re-establish macroeconomic stability, and that was very much related to what had happened in the previous 5 years. And a key achievement of that was, of course, anchoring inflation at in and around 4%. So that has been achieved. Another key effort was to cleaning up the banking system and the financial system more broadly, particularly using the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code. Again, both of these efforts are painful, but they're very important things to have been done. And finally, there was an effort to essentially create pathways for trickle-down, especially for last-mile delivery of services and direct transfer of benefits and so on. So all of those things were important foundation for doing what we are now arguing for, which is somewhat different thing that we are talking about, which is how do we instigate 8% GDP growth per annum for a prolonged period of time. And we did some research into the international experience of doing this, particularly looking at the East Asian experience, and it is very clear there is one clear model of doing this if you want to do it, which is that you have to have investment driven growth. Particularly, you need to drive up the investment rate to over 35% of GDP. Now, clearly that is the objective to do it, and that requires doing a lot of things, from lowering the cost of capital, legal reforms, labor reforms, all kinds of things. But that is what the crux of this is. First, identifying a blueprint of how to do it and be clear of what the pros and cons of that model are.
No, you've identified the blueprint, but you've also accepted that the investment cycle has suffered. You know, my point that it has bottomed out. You know that the government seems to be accepting that industry capacity utilization is only around 70% due to pressure in the sales in the market. You know that NBFC stress is one of the reasons for the slowdown. So there is an acceptance of the crisis, which is good. And yet at the same time, you seem to be talking up this economy. You know, I need to understand, is there an attempt being made that while accepting the challenges, you are trying to sugarcoat it, to give the impression to the average person, don't worry, be happy. So you don't want, you live in denial at one level and acceptance at the other.
Not at all. I mean, we are very clear that the economy has slowed down. We are more than aware of the various problems that the Indian economy faces and how these things have evolved. So we have been quite frank in putting those things together. At the same time, we think we have put together a realistic blueprint of what can be done over the next 5 years to accelerate growth substantially. And as I pointed out to you, we have laid out a whole bunch of reforms that can be done and should be done as quickly as possible in order to get this moving again.
But you know, Sanjeev Sanyal, many of these reforms are politically challenging. Mr. Modi in his first term, especially when it came to land and labor, held back. Now you've got a government re-elected, huge mandate. Will he be more willing? Do you believe the Prime Minister will be more willing to take the kind of contentious decisions on land and labor that he was unwilling to do in term one? Will we see a very different prime ministerial approach to the economy and to these key structural reforms?
Well, I am not in a position to make a political call. I can just, as a principal economic advisor, I can lay out the landscape of the things that need to be done in order to achieve a certain target. What the political price that has to be paid for doing it is not really for me to judge.
You know, Kiran Majumdar-Shaw, the survey also makes a pitch for bigger companies. It says MSMEs should be unshackled. What I find interesting is these were the very MSMEs which suffered as a result of demonetization. Now the government says unshackle them. Policy should be reframed to help them grow into bigger companies that will create more jobs. In a sense, admitting that there is a crisis of jobs which until now the government has been in denial of. Do you see any real changes in that direction? Do you really see this government now unshackling MSMEs, giving them the kind of support they really need?
Well, I certainly believe that a large number of MSMEs are shackled and are stunted because of lack of access to capital. And I think a lack of also access to capital markets. I think both these need to unshackle them. And I think getting them to the capital markets will require investment into MSMEs where some capital gains on these kind of investments needs to, be incentivized. On the other hand, I think there is an access to capital problem because of lending issues with the banks. And I think again, MSMEs do need capital to scale up, because it's only through scaling up will they become more efficient. So I think there is a win-win in terms of creating that access to capital through creative funding and through incentives. So I think definitely there is a need, because whilst MSMEs are extremely important, the startup economy is a very important economy, you need to scale up. And that scaling is where we have a challenge. There's not enough capital to scale up. So I think that's where you need that creative thinking and that creative financing that will actually incentivize investment in MSMEs and in the startup economy. For instance, I think the startup economy definitely needs to do away with angel tax. It needs to basically encourage venture funding, and in that you will have to give some kind of long-term relief from capital gains tax, because I think these are some of the areas where you need funding and it's not happening. There's a lot of flight of capital taking place because a lot of these companies are going overseas to raise capital. So we don't want to lose these, these potential unicorns, these potential innovative companies just because we can't provide them capital.
It's very interesting, Sanjeev Sanyal, that even in this survey, a lot of talk is about the psychology of human behavior, of so-called behavioral economics. How do you change the psychology of people? How do you, in a sense, get people to commit themselves to giving up their subsidies and even, almost reaching out to people through quoting from the Rig Veda? I'm just trying to understand. This is perhaps the first time the economic survey quotes from the Rig Veda to try and influence people, the psychology of people, asking them to get inspired, give up thinking about themselves, think about subsidies, about, from tax evasion to tax compliance. All this behavioral economics, is there something unique in this? What are you actually trying to say? What is when the economic landscape is what it is, why give this behavioral economics tinge to it?
Absolutely. In fact, not just that. If you see right from the beginning, what we have tried to do is to suggest that we are breaking away quite deliberately from the usual Washington consensus type of economics, the Anglo-Saxon type of economics. And we have done it in multiple ways and drawn inspiration from many other places. So you have, of course, mentioned that we have drawn upon ancient Indian thinkers, including, by the way, Kautilya, Kamandak, and so on. But we have also drawn inspiration from Austrian economist Hayek, and we have also drawn inspiration from East Asian sources. You'll see Deng Xiaoping being quoted. We have widely talked about the East Asian miracle and so on. So what we have tried quite obviously here is to break away from the stranglehold on our economic thinking from the usual east coast of the US thinking that we have had for many, many years now. And of course, before that, we had the Fabian socialist model.
In a sense, you're trying to bridge the gap, therefore, between Hayek and the Rig Veda. I'm trying to understand what this indigenization of the economy.
Yes, why not? I mean, why shouldn't we let ideas come from all directions, as the Rig Veda as well says. But the point is, if you look at the international situation as well, it's not just in India, but worldwide, there has been a widespread rejection of the traditional models. So we have introduced into the conversation behavioral economics, which is now widely accepted worldwide, including Thaler's nudge. We have seen introduction of ideas drawn from complexity theory, which you will see also being used quite widely. It's, by the way, not something I've suddenly discovered. I talked about behavioral economics and complexity theory for over a decade, and I've written extensively on it. So it's not something that either I or the chief economic advisor suddenly stumbled upon. But we had an opportunity here to lay out some of these ideas, and we took it.
Okay, we've heard two voices on the economic survey. Let's now come down to the real brass tacks of what the big questions are. I appreciate both of you joining us. Let's raise the big questions once again. Is this 5 trillion economy by 2024 a pipe dream of the Modi government? Is the 7% growth forecast in the survey realistic? How can the government really boost private investment? How can the government boost consumption? What should we really be doing to create more jobs? How can the government help SMEs hit by GST and DMO really grow? What happens to farm incomes? Just some of the questions that we will raise, challenges that Nirmala Sitharaman will be facing come tomorrow. PN Vijay also joining us at the moment, someone who's been closely associated with the ruling party. But let me start with you, Professor Arun Kumar. You've heard you've read the chief economic survey, you've heard the economic advisor. What do you really believe? Is the government on the right track, or is it creating this sort of a world, living in a world of denial even today?
So, an economic survey is supposed to be an easy explanation of what's happening in the economy in the current year.
Yes.
So what's happened now, because the budget is being presented now in this year, it's supposed to say what was going on in the last year.
Yes.
What this economic survey needed to do was clear the ground as to what is the rate of growth, what is the rate of inflation, what is the current account deficit. That it doesn't do because there's a lot of controversy on the rate of growth. Now, if the rate of growth is incorrect, as was the case in the last year, then your revenue projections are wrong, then your expenditure projections are wrong, and therefore what has happened is GST collections are short by 80,000 crores, your direct tax collections short by 80,000 crores, and therefore the government cut back expenditures by 1,60,000 crores to maintain 3.4%.
So given the nature of the challenge of the revenue deficit in particular, do you believe this 7% growth target is realistic or not?
No, so I'm coming to that. Now, when you say $5 trillion and 8% rate of growth, that's not going to achieve it, because dollar terms means real growth, not nominal growth, and if you're talking about doubling of incomes, you need 12.5% on an average, which means starting from 5.8%, you have to go to 18% towards the end. If you are to go, now achieving 10% is difficult, achieving 12.5% is difficult, achieving 18% is even more difficult. So what do we believe? The rate of growth that we need.
Do you believe the survey or not?
No, I don't think it's clarifying the air, and it's in fact going to behavioral economics and other things which are making it even more obtuse for the common person to understand.
Prasenjit Bose, do you believe that the survey is being unrealistic about what the state of the economy is, or are they accepting that we are in a slowdown?
Well, I think that the survey is actually a very confused document. I think the people who have worked on the survey, written the survey, are themselves confused. Because on the one hand, they start the survey by saying these are the accomplishments of the past 5 years. If there are so many accomplishments, then what is the need to worry? Then they are saying, and you know, the economic survey goes on and on to say that the investment is the key. We don't need the economic survey to tell us that we need investments to revive a slowing down economy. Everybody knows that. Even as, you know, undergraduate student of economics, a school student of economics knows that we need investment. The whole point is that what has happened to the investment story in our country, how do we, you know, revive it? I think that is where the economic survey basically says that the cost of capital is too high. We need to bring down interest rates. That is not a matter of fiscal policy. The RBI has already started moving in that direction. What it does not do is, I think it is basically wishful thinking. We already had Make in India. It did not work in the 5 years. Now, what exactly does the economic survey tell us that if the government does these things, something like this is going to happen?
Let me take that to P.N. Vijay. P.N. Vijay, is this wishful thinking? Is the government living in, is this economic survey, as I said, sugar-coated to prevent people from swallowing the real bitter pill that we are in hard times? That these are every businessman, every investor, we heard Kiran Majumdar-Shaw, no one is talking up the economy in the way the government and the survey does.
No, I wouldn't go to that extent, Rajdeep. The survey does admit of a slowdown. The survey does say that private investment has been sluggish. It's not in denial mode. But it's a document coming from North Block, so it's not going to paint the picture too bleak, as you understand. And the survey does have a strategy. It says that let's take the East Asian model, let's drive savings and investment. And another important component is it talks about an export growth. And when it comes to private investments, it talks about SMEs as the pillar for the investment, because they are obviously job intensive. But all of this is stating the obvious. Now the challenge that I see in this...
all of this is stating the obvious.
Yeah, the challenge... there could be... No, Rajdeep, for example, there could be another model. There could be a consumption-driven model. Mm-hmm. So there could be different models. This is putting its neck out and saying we are following the East Asian model of savings, investment and export-led growth. Now, so there is a strategy. My problem with this survey, if you ask me, is it is depending on two areas which appear to be at this point in time the weakest areas of the economy. One is exports. It says so that the domestic consumption does not become very bad, we need to push exports. Now, export track record of the last 1 or 2 years has not been very good, as you and I know. The second is SMEs as the key drivers of private investment. Today, if you see the status of SMEs, whether it's because the credit transmission, especially after the NBFC crisis, has just stopped, or whether it's because they are still reeling in the aftermath of all the compliances of GST, the SMEs are, in my view, the weakest part of the Indian economy. So to have an 8% growth strategy based on exports and SMEs, I think is walking a very tricky path.
Let me take that to Rajiv Dubey then. Therefore, in a sense, there is an admission to that extent in this survey that maybe there are things that we got wrong in the last few years. That, now the chickens are finally coming home to roost in a way.
So, Rajdeep, we know that the last quarter was pretty bad, 5.8%. Yes. We know that this quarter is going to be worse than that. We also know that last fiscal, our agri gross capital formation and GVA were both lower than the previous fiscal. We also know an alarming number in this survey is that our services economy is slowing down, has slowed down. And then out of this, we want a growth rate of 7% at a time when we don't know whether we have still hit the bottom. We haven't hit the bottom yet. So
you don't think we've hit the bottom yet?
Of course not. Of course not. This quarter is definitely going to be worse than previous quarter. We don't know about the next quarter. So unless we have seen an uptake, how are we expecting a 7% growth? We don't even know where we are going to see the bottom.
Given that, Mr. Ahluwalia, should the government now, if this is the state of the economy, you need to take a lot of hard decisions. You need to take political risks for structural reform. Mr. Modi is equipped with a second term, with a big mandate. Is this survey, in a sense, telling Mr. Modi, bite the bullet this time? Which he didn't in term one.
Rajdeep, two things. One is that this is the first economic survey written by the new CEA. So I think we have to give him some leeway that in terms of how hard he can play. I think we have to acknowledge that. Also, one thing that he seems to have missed entirely, which is mentioned but not put into context, is that, see, it's not about investment. The problem is in savings. If we don't save, what will we invest with? Will anybody give us money from overseas to invest when we ourselves are profligate? That is the central problem of Modi 1.0, that they have forgotten completely about public savings, and you see that in the increase in the revenue deficit to 2.8 today. I'm sure it will go up further as compared to 2.2 earlier. It was supposed to be down to something like 1.5 by now. It's at 2.8. That's the central problem that the survey has not tackled, that how do we increase the savings rate.
So what does the finance minister do come tomorrow? Let's focus on that. You know, the survey has told us where we stand today. Given where we stand, what is it that Nirmala Sitharaman in her budget can do tomorrow that can perhaps trigger an uptake?
Okay, so the government has to increase its expenditure, especially on capital items. It has to increase its expenditure on things like public education, public health, etc. Those are the employment generating things. It has to increase expenditures or enable the micro sector. And this is where I find the confusion in the economic survey. MSME is a misnomer because micro sector is 99% of the units of the MSME. So when we say small and medium, it's not micro. So special
focus. Does the government though have the elbow room?
Yes.
Does it have the elbow room to make these investments that you're talking about at the moment?
To do that, it has to raise resources. Either it allows the fiscal deficit to rise further, or it has to raise resources. To raise resources, it has to identify from the direct taxes, because under indirect taxes, only GST Council can decide the rates. This budget cannot do it. So therefore, direct taxes have to be affected. And where can it do it? Given the large, increase in the inequality, wealth taxation, estate duty, and your gift tax, these three taxes are a source from which you can raise additional resources, so that
you are saying something that's going to frighten a lot of people out there who are already speculating about estate tax, gift tax, possibly a rise in direct income tax.
No, but wealth taxation, because 9 people have as much wealth as 70 crore people have in this country, according to the Oxfam report. Disparities have increased dramatically in the last 30 years, and therefore, if you tax only 0.5%, 5% of the rich people, you'll get 2 to 3 lakh crores of rupees.
Are you going to go along with that? That Ms. Sitharaman needs to go in for massive change in direct taxation, for example, or wealth tax?
My view is diametrically opposite.
Yes.
This is not the time when we should increase our expenditure. This is the time when we should be decreasing our subsidies and all our revenue expenditures, so that we bring the budget on a revenue basis to a stable level, and government can cut back on its borrowing, so that the rate of lending and the rate of
how do I incentivize this virtual cycle of investment?
You have to incentivize. You have to incentivize a virtuous circle of savings, not investment. Investment will follow.
This is a totally supply side view.
These are two different views.
Views, but that view has precisely run the economy down to the ground. Therefore, why should we persist with that view? See, I think that there are two things. First of all, what needs to be done and what one expects the government to do.
Yes.
What needs to be done, number one, there is absolutely no way, if the economy is slowing down, for a budget to bring the economy out of that, you need a fiscal stimulus. Secondly, given the situation of the banking sector, despite what the survey has claimed, the economic advisor was saying that we did IBC and so on, the bank's balance sheets are not clean yet. So credit revival has not taken place. You still have, on the back of an 85,000 crore loss of 21 public sector banks last financial year, last year 66,000 crore loss. So we are still writing off NPAs.
The government can focus on banking reform, on land, on labor, but on the other hand, what about privatization? What about disinvestment?
Disinvestment, this government has set a record of disinvestment. Let us not forget.
No, they've done it through
1 lakh crore, 80,000 crore every year. No other government ever has raised.
But the government needs to raise resources. Isn't it time for the government to withdraw from critical areas and focus on areas like banking, where you clean up your balance sheets, focus on land, focus on labor, get get the structural reforms
You
in
need
place.
a fiscal stimulus. I
Why?
think that
In the past, we've tried it
the
with
real
fiscal
debate
stimulus.
is-
It's never worked.
No. What are you saying?
In
The fact that we did not go down the way, during the Great Recession 10 years ago, the reason why the Indian economy stayed afloat was because of a fiscal stimulus.
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah.
And
So
yes. I'll come this
what I'd
side.
say is that supply side responses and structural changes take time. What you need to do is to revive the economy today, and that's why the fiscal stimulus is needed today. If you think of financial sector reform,
You think Nirmala Sitharaman should put out it should give some kind of fiscal stimulus tomorrow itself?
without that your economy is going to go further down
So
because it's the demand problem. The demand problem is what has led to the problem today. Your capacity utilization, as you rightly said, is down to 70%. Why would anybody invest if the capacity utilization is so low?
Absolutely.
That's what even Kiran Mazumdar Shaw said,
private
that we will not
sector won't
invest.
invest.
If the automobile sector is down as much as it is, why would it invest? So you have to revive demand. Where do you begin to revive demand? That's why I said employment has to be revived. Education, health, which are employment intensive. In fact, even infrastructure, which is in the organized sector, is not employment intensive. Earlier, if you built a kilometer of road, you had 100 people working. Today, you have big bulldozers, etc. 3 people working. That's not going to create employment.
So
that's not going to create
it'll
demand.
be a folly to believe. It'll be a folly to believe that we can gloss over 2/3 of the reason why our economy is in this deep slowdown, and that is consumption. Consumption has to be taken, this has to be taken head on. And consumption you can only take, that's the immediate concern.
No, which the economic survey points
so
out.
how would you increase consumption? You have to leave more investable surplus in the hands of the companies. You have to leave more disposable income in the hands of individuals.
So you bring
have
down,
to ensure
corporate
corporate
tax as the government had promised in 2014,
You
that
will
over a
have to
period
do
of
that.
time bring it
You
to
will have to do
25%.
that. You will have
Then
to
you'll
do
have
that.
More than
percentage.
more
And
than
also,
corporate tax. What about income tax? What about income tax exemption?
That's what I'm saying. So you
Yes.
need more disposable income
Yes.
in the hands
So
of
that's
individuals.
what-
Individuals will go and buy, computers,
Yes.
cars, automobiles or whatever, and corporates will go and expand capacities and set up new capacities. That is one. Then you have to ensure that government's public expenditure continues in infrastructure and agri as they have committed. They've committed 100 lakh crore in 5 years in infrastructure. So 20 lakh crore per annum. We don't have that kind of resources in the first year, and then agri commitment is 25 lakh crore over 5 years.
I'm pointing out the hard numbers, unemployment rate, we've looked at agrarian incomes, all of these suggest that these are worrying signals, which the survey also acknowledges. PN Vijay, your 1-point solution, I know there are no magic solutions, no no magic bullets here, but if you were in Nirmala Sitharaman's place, the first, dare I say, woman full-time finance minister presenting a budget, what would you tell her?
I'll tell her to continue the public investment because the private sector is surely not going to jump in and invest unless capacity utilization improves. And side by side, she should desist from the temptation of high taxation, etc. And she should spur consumption, as one of the gentlemen said. Spurring consumption means putting more money in the hands of individuals, in some way incentivize them to spend. Only when they spend, companies get bullish, the animal spirits come back and they invest in capital. So on one side, government should keep up its commitment of public spending, and on the other side, it should incentivize private consumption so that the economy can quickly come back onto the rails.
I have just 2 minutes. I'm going to ask you 30 seconds each. You start, Mr. Ahluwalia. The one thing that you'd suggest to Nirmala Sitharaman.
Right. So one, we should quit muddled thinking that, that sort of says that there is a silver bullet. There is no option before the government except to continue infrastructure spending. Yes. That's a good way to go. But the government must cut back on revenue expenditure. There is no way you can push consumption with the fact that tax income is already lower than expected, and maybe it'll go down even more with poor corporate profitability. So cut back on revenue expenditure, not capital expenditure.
Prasanjit, a solution.
There has to be a fiscal stimulus. You cannot come out of this slowdown, and in order to give that fiscal stimulus, come out of the denial mode.
So, yes, you should cut revenue expenditure where you are, but most of them are committed. You will not be able to cut very much. If you want to increase expenditures so as to boost the economy, then you need to collect additional resources, otherwise the fiscal deficit will rise, which will create its own problems. So where do you collect your additional resources? That becomes a very important question, and that has to be from direct taxes, not income tax, not cut in corporation tax, but target wealth tax, which used to be there earlier, which has to be brought back, estate duty and gift tax.
Okay, I think we've got a sense of what lies ahead tomorrow. Clearly, this is a huge challenge before Nirmala Sitharaman. The global headwinds, not quite what they were 5 years ago. Things have changed. Thank you all very much for joining me on my talking point.
Thanks for watching the video. For more such news and updates, please like, share and subscribe to India Today. Also check out our other great videos from our channel. We know you will love to.